The Zephyrian Council convened in their crystal palace that floated among the clouds of their homeworld, Ethros Prime. The 12 beings that sat around the luminous table were unlike anything most sentient species had ever encountered. Their bodies shimmered with an inner light that seemed to bend reality itself. When they moved, space rippled around them like water disturbed by a stone. Their voices carried harmonics that could shatter mountains or heal wounds with equal ease. For over 10,000 years, they had ruled the galaxy with absolute authority. To the countless civilizations under their dominion, they were not merely rulers, but living deities worthy of worship and absolute obedience. The Zephyrians had never questioned this arrangement. After all, they possessed powers that seemed to defy the very laws of physics that bound lesser beings. High Arbiter Vexthalon, the most powerful among them, gestured with one crystalline hand, and the air before him shimmered. A holographic display materialized, showing a small blue and green world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star in the Outer Rim territories. The planet looked insignificant, almost primitive compared to the gleaming megastructures and artificial worlds that housed most of the galaxy's advanced civilizations. "This world troubles me." Vexthalon's voice resonated through the chamber, each word carrying undertones that made reality itself seem to vibrate. "The inhabitants call themselves humans, and they refuse our divine guidance." Arbiter Zyexandra leaned forward, her ethereal features creased with confusion. "Refuse? How is such a thing possible? No species has ever refused our blessing. Even the warrior clans of Drakmor and the hive minds of the Quantum Collective bowed before our might within cycles of first contact. These humans are different," Vexthalon continued, manipulating the display to show images of Earth's surface. Cities sprawled across continents, but they were not the orderly, geometric perfection that the Zephyrians had imposed on other worlds. Instead, they seemed chaotic, organic, almost alive in their randomness. When our heralds descended to offer them a place in our divine order, the humans did something unprecedented. The council watched in stunned silence as the hologram played recordings from the first contact attempt. A massive Zephyrian vessel, beautiful beyond description and radiating power that could be felt across dimensions, had appeared in Earth's skies. The herald aboard had broadcast the traditional message in every language on the planet, explaining the honor being bestowed upon humanity and the glory of serving their new gods. The response had been immediate and shocking. Military vessels from every nation on Earth had converged on the Zephyrian ship, not to worship or offer tribute, but to surround it with weapons drawn. The humans had demanded the aliens identify themselves and state their intentions. When the herald had explained that the Zephyrians were gods deserving of worship, the human response had been even more astounding. They had laughed. "Impossible," whispered Arbiter Korvesh, the youngest member of the council. "They must have misunderstood. Perhaps their primitive minds cannot comprehend our nature." Vexthalon's expression darkened. "The heralds made our divine nature perfectly clear. They demonstrated our power by reshaping a small moon in their solar system, turning it from barren rock into a garden paradise in mere moments. The humans acknowledged our abilities, but still refused to kneel." The recording continued, showing the human response to the terraforming demonstration. Instead of falling to their knees in worship, as every other species had done, the humans had become even more defiant. Their leaders had declared that no being, regardless of power, had the right to claim dominion over Earth or its people. They had demanded the Zephyrians leave immediately or face the consequences. "Consequences?" Arbiter Nixeller laughed, the sound like crystal bells in a hurricane. "What consequences could such primitives possibly threaten us with? Their technology appears to be barely beyond chemical propulsion. They have not even achieved faster-than-light travel." "That is what disturbs me most," Vexthalon replied. "They showed no fear. Every other species, when confronted with our might, experiences an instinctive recognition of our superiority. It is built into the very fabric of life itself. Yet these humans looked upon our power and felt only anger. The council members exchanged troubled glances. In 10 millennia of absolute rule, they had never encountered such a phenomenon. Species might resist initially out of ignorance or stubbornness, but when the Zephyrians demonstrated their godlike abilities, submission always followed. It was the natural order of things. Perhaps we were too subtle in our approach, suggested Arbiter Thexmeron, his form crackling with barely contained energy. A more direct demonstration of our divinity might bring them to their senses. We could reshape one of their continents, or perhaps alter their star itself. Surely then they would understand. Vexthalon shook his head slowly. I considered such measures, but there is something else. Our psychic probe of their world revealed something deeply unsettling about these humans. They do not think as other species think. Where we find order and hierarchy, they see opportunity for chaos. Where we impose structure, they create innovation. They are unpredictable. The recording shifted to show intercepted human communications following the first contact. The beings around the table watched in growing bewilderment as they observed human reactions to the Zephyrian arrival. While some humans had indeed shown the expected fear and awe, many others had responded with curiosity, excitement, and even challenge. Scientists demanded to study Zephyrian technology. Military leaders strategized about potential conflicts. Artists created works inspired by the encounter, often depicting humans as equals or even victors in imagined struggles with the aliens. Most disturbing of all were the human religious and philosophical responses. Rather than immediately accepting the Zephyrians as gods, many humans had begun debating the very nature of divinity. Some argued that power alone did not make one divine. Others questioned whether beings from another world could truly understand human needs and values well enough to rule them. A significant number had declared that if the Zephyrians were truly gods, they would respect human free will rather than demanding submission. This is madness. Arbiter Zelkoith hissed, her form shifting between states of matter as her agitation grew. They speak of our divine nature as if it were a matter of opinion, as if beings blessed with cosmic power might somehow be wrong. Indeed, Vexthalon agreed. And there's worse news. Our intelligence network reports that the humans have begun preparing for war. Not the desperate, futile resistance we occasionally face from primitive worlds, but calculated, strategic preparation. They're studying our first contact extensively, analyzing every detail for weaknesses. The council erupted in shocked murmurs. The very idea that creatures so far beneath them could conceive of victory against gods was beyond their understanding. Yet the evidence continued to mount. The hologram showed human activities across their world. Research facilities working around the clock to understand the physics behind Zephyrian abilities. Military exercises focusing on asymmetric warfare against technologically superior opponents. Industrial efforts to rapidly expand their weapons production capabilities. Most ominously, human leaders were reaching out to other species in the galaxy, seeking allies and information about their new enemies. They call us enemies, Arbiter Corvesh said in wonder. Not gods to be appeased or masters to be served, but enemies to be defeated. How is such thinking possible? Vexthalon manipulated the display again, showing a recording from a human military briefing that their spies had intercepted. A stern-faced human general stood before a room full of officers, his voice calm, but filled with determination as he spoke. These aliens may have power we don't understand yet, but they're not gods. They're just another species that thinks might makes right. Throughout our history, we've faced tyrants who claimed divine authority. We've stood up to kings who said they ruled by heaven's will. We've fought dictators who declared themselves superior to common humanity. And we've beaten every one of them. The general's eyes blazed with defiance as he continued. These Zephyrians want us to kneel? They want us to worship them just because they can do things we can't? Well, I've got news for them. Humanity doesn't kneel. Not to anyone. Not ever. We're going to show these so-called gods what happens when you threaten human freedom. The recording ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. For long moments, none of the Zephyrians spoke. Finally, Vexthalen broke the quiet with words that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. "I fear," he said slowly, "that we may have encountered our first real challenge in 10,000 years." Arbiter Nixeller scoffed, though her voice carried less certainty than before. "Challenge? They are insects compared to us. We command forces that can reshape reality itself. We could extinguish their star with a thought, or turn their world to dust with a gesture." "Yes," Vexthalen agreed, "but would that make us appear more divine or more monstrous? And, more importantly, could we do so before they found ways to strike back? These humans are not like other species. They do not accept defeat as inevitable. Even faced with certain destruction, they would fight to the last breath, and they would learn from every exchange." The High Arbiter stood, his form radiating concern. "I'm calling an emergency session of the Greater Council. All 27 arbiters must hear of this development. If these humans truly refuse to acknowledge our divinity, if they actually intend to wage war against gods themselves, then we face a crisis unlike any in our history." As the council members prepared to depart, Arbiter Thexmaron voiced the question that haunted them all. What if they actually have a chance? What if these impossible humans, with their chaos and defiance and refusal to accept the natural order, could actually threaten us? Vexthalen looked out through the crystal walls of their palace at the stars beyond, somewhere among which a small blue world harbored the most dangerous beings they had ever encountered. Not because of their power, which was minimal, but because of their absolute refusal to believe that power alone gave anyone the right to rule. Then, he said quietly, "The galaxy is about to change in ways we cannot imagine. For if gods can fall, what becomes of the divine order we have maintained for so long?" The question hung in the air, like a prophecy, as the Zephyrian Council dispersed to prepare for the most important gathering in their civilization's history. Across the galaxy, their vast empire continued its ancient routines, unaware that on a distant world called Earth, a species existed that would rather die fighting than live kneeling. The stage was set for a conflict that would determine not just the fate of humanity, but the future of divine authority itself. The gods were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is one who simply refuses to believe that you are God. Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the war room beneath NORAD, surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of every known Zephyrian vessel in Earth's solar system. The aliens had arrived in force 3 weeks after humanity's rejection of their divine authority, bringing with them ships that defied conventional understanding of physics and engineering. Yet despite their overwhelming technological advantage, the Zephyrians had not immediately attacked. "They're still trying to figure us out," Chen said to the assembled military leaders from every major nation on Earth. "Their whole worldview depends on other species recognizing them as gods. We've broken their pattern, and now they don't know how to proceed." General Marcus Webb, representing the European Defense Coalition, leaned over the tactical display. "Our xenobiology teams have been analyzing the intercepted communications. These beings apparently ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years without facing a single serious challenge. They've never had to adapt their strategies because brute force and intimidation have always worked. That's our advantage," added Dr. Yuki Tanaka, head of the hastily formed Xenotechnology Research Division. "They're used to fighting primitive civilizations that surrender after the first demonstration of power. They have no experience with asymmetric warfare or dealing with opponents who refuse to acknowledge their superiority." The display shifted to show the massive Zephyrian command ship hovering above Earth's North Pole. The vessel was a work of art as much as it was a weapon, its crystalline structure constantly shifting and reforming like a living thing. Energy readings from the ship suggested it possessed enough firepower to devastate continents, yet it remained motionless, as if its occupants were paralyzed by indecision. Intelligence reports suggest they're having heated debates about how to handle us, Chen continued. Some faction wants to destroy Earth as an example to other species. Another group insists that would make them appear weak rather than divine. They're caught between their need to maintain their godlike image and their desire to eliminate the threat we represent. Colonel Dmitry Volkov, the Russian representative, smiled grimly. Let them debate. Every day they hesitate gives us more time to prepare. Our industrial capacity has increased threefold since first contact. The new weapon systems are coming online ahead of schedule. The weapons Colonel Volkov referenced were humanity's desperate attempt to level the playing field. Traditional kinetic and energy weapons had proven useless against Zephyrian shields, which seemed to operate on principles that human science barely understood. Instead, human engineers had focused on developing weapons that exploited the aliens' overconfidence and their reliance on their perceived divine nature. Dr. Tanaka activated another display, showing the schematic for something called a reality anchor. The device looked deceptively simple, but its function was revolutionary. We've discovered that Zephyrian abilities rely on their capacity to manipulate fundamental forces through what can only be described as localized reality alteration. They literally rewrite the laws of physics in small areas to achieve their effects. The anchors create zones where physical laws become absolutely fixed, she continued. Within their influence, Zephyrian powers simply don't work. They become just another species with advanced technology rather than gods, reshaping reality at will. General Webb studied the specifications with growing excitement. How many can we deploy? The first 100 are ready now, with more coming online every day. We're installing them on our ships, our defense platforms, and in strategic locations across Earth. When the Zephyrians finally attack, they're going to discover that their godlike powers have very real limitations. As if summoned by their words, alarms began sounding throughout the command center. Admiral Chen's aide rushed to her side with an urgent communication pad. Ma'am, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Zephyrian fleet. They're demanding immediate surrender and acknowledgement of their divine authority. Chen accepted the communication device and activated it. The air shimmered, and suddenly, a towering figure materialized in the center of the war room. High Arbiter Vexthalen appeared as a being of pure light and energy, his form constantly shifting between states of matter. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made the humans' ears ring and their bones vibrate. Mortals of Earth, the projection intoned, you have had sufficient time to consider your position. The patience of gods is not infinite. You will submit to our divine will, acknowledge our rightful place as your rulers, and accept the order we bring to this galaxy. Refuse, and your world will serve as an example of what befalls those who defy divinity itself. Admiral Chen stepped forward, her voice steady despite, facing a being that claimed to wield the power of gods. High Arbiter, I am Admiral Sarah Chun, speaking for the people of Earth. Our answer remains the same as it was during first contact. We acknowledge no gods, but those of our own choosing. We bow to no authority that claims the right to rule through power alone. If you wish to share this galaxy with humanity, you will do so as equals, not as masters. Vexthalen's form flared brighter, reality itself seeming to bend around his growing anger. Equals? You speak of equality with beings who transcend your very understanding of existence? We reshape matter with our thoughts, bend space with our will, and command forces that dwarf your primitive comprehension. What could creatures such as you possibly offer that would make you our equals? We can offer you something your empire has never experienced in 10,000 years, Chen replied, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. We can offer you a real fight. The silence that followed her words seemed to stretch for eternity. The Zephyrian's projection flickered as if the very concept Chun had expressed was difficult for his technology to process. Finally, he spoke again, his voice carrying notes of confusion and growing fury. A fight? You threaten war against gods? Your weapons cannot penetrate our defenses. Your ships cannot match our speed. Your minds cannot comprehend our strategies. What madness possesses you to think you could stand against us? General Webb stepped up beside Admiral Chun. We've studied your empire, Arbiter. For 10 millennia, you've ruled through intimidation and overwhelming displays of power. You've never had to innovate, never had to adapt, never had to truly fight for victory. Your tactics haven't evolved because they've never needed to. You've become predictable. Predictable. Vexthalen's form began to pulse with dangerous energy. We command the fundamental forces of reality itself. We are beyond your capacity to predict or understand. Are you? Dr. Tanaka joined the confrontation, her scientific mind fascinated even in the face of apparent divinity. Your powers follow patterns. Your responses to resistance are consistent across your entire history. You're not gods, Arbiter. You're just another species that got lucky enough to develop reality manipulation before anyone else. And, like every other species, you have weaknesses. The Zephyrian projection became unstable, static crackling around its edges as Vexthalen's composure finally shattered. Weaknesses? You dare suggest that gods have weaknesses? Your arrogance will be your destruction. I offer you one final chance to submit. Kneel before our divine authority and accept the mercy we offer, or face annihilation. Admiral Chun looked around at her fellow humans, seeing the same determination in every face that had carried their species through countless trials and conflicts. We have a saying on Earth, Arbiter. We'd rather die on our feet than live on our knees. If you want to rule humanity, you'll have to earn it the hard way. The projection flickered and died, leaving the war room in sudden silence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, the tactical displays erupted with activity as sensors detected massive energy buildups across the Zephyrian fleet. All units, this is Admiral Chun, she announced over the global communication network. The talking is over. They're coming. Remember your training, trust your equipment, and show these would-be gods what happens when they threaten Earth. All reality anchors to full power. All ships to combat stations. Today we find out if gods can bleed. Across Earth's solar system, the largest space battle in human history began to unfold. Zephyrian vessels that had never known defeat descended toward Earth with the confidence of beings accustomed to easy victory. They expected to face primitive weapons and desperate courage, as they had countless times before. Instead, they encountered something that hadn't existed in the galaxy for 10,000 years, an opponent that refused to be intimidated, refused to surrender, and absolutely refused to kneel. The reality anchors came online one by one, creating pockets of space where physics obeyed human rules rather than Zephyrian will. The first Zephyrian ship to enter an anchor field discovered that its reality manipulation abilities simply stopped working. Its weapons, which depended on localized alterations to fundamental forces, failed to fire. Its shields, which bent space around the ship to deflect attacks, collapsed. For the first time in millennia, the Zephyrian vessel found itself vulnerable. Human ships, equipped with conventional but devastatingly effective weapons, swarmed the suddenly defenseless alien craft. Rail guns that fired projectiles at significant fractions of light speed punched through holes that had never before been breached. Nuclear missiles that the Zephyrians had dismissed as primitive toys detonated against ships whose protective fields no longer functioned. The first Zephyrian vessel to die in combat for 10,000 years exploded in a brilliant flash that illuminated half of Earth's solar system. And, in that moment, watching their supposedly invincible ship destroyed by creatures they considered beneath notice, the remaining Zephyrians learned something that would change the galaxy forever. Gods could indeed bleed. And if they could bleed, perhaps they were not gods after all. The destruction of the first Zephyrian vessel sent shockwaves through the alien fleet that had nothing to do with the explosion itself. For beings who had never experienced defeat, watching one of their own die was a psychological trauma beyond their ability to process. Aboard the command ship, High Arbiter Vexthalen stood frozen in disbelief, staring at the tactical display where one of their vessels had simply ceased to exist. "Impossible," whispered Arbiter Corvesh, her luminous form flickering with distress. The ship was protected by divine will itself. How could mortal weapons penetrate barriers woven from the fabric of reality? "Their technology," Vexthalen said slowly, his voice lacking its usual divine confidence. "These reality anchors they've deployed. Somehow, they've found a way to counteract our abilities. Within those fields, we are—" He paused, struggling to voice a concept that had never applied to his species before. "We are vulnerable." The admission hung in the air like a blasphemous curse. For 10,000 years, the Zephyrians had been untouchable, their power so absolute that the very idea of vulnerability was foreign to their language. Yet here they were, watching their ships being systematically hunted by creatures they had dismissed as insects. Admiral Chen's voice crackled across the communication channels as Earth's fleet pressed their unexpected advantage. "All units, maintain formation and stay within anchor field coverage. Use the fields as mobile safe zones and draw them in. Make them come to us." The human strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than attempting to match the Zephyrians in a direct confrontation across open space, they had created zones where their enemies' greatest advantages were neutralized. It was like forcing a master swordsman to fight while blind and bound, reducing the conflict to a contest of pure tactical skill and determination. Aboard the human flagship Defiance, Captain Liu Wei watched as another Zephyrian vessel made the fatal mistake of pursuing a human ship into an anchor field. The alien craft, a graceful spire of crystalline perfection that had once seemed invincible, suddenly found itself fighting by the same physical laws that governed human technology. Its exotic matter armor became simple crystalline structures that shattered under concentrated fire. Its phase weapons, which had once ignored conventional defenses, became harmless light shows when they couldn't manipulate reality to function. "Target destroyed," reported the weapons officer, his voice tight with amazement. "That's their 4th ship lost to our 7th squadron alone." Captain Liu activated his communication array to address the entire human fleet. "All ships, this is Liu. These aliens have ruled through fear and intimidation for 10 millennia, but they've never learned to actually fight. They depend entirely on their reality manipulation. Take that away, and they're helpless. Press the advantage." But even as humanity celebrated their unexpected success, the Zephyrians were learning. High Arbiter Vexthalen had not maintained his position for thousands of years without possessing considerable intelligence. He studied the tactical data from the destroyed ships, his godlike mind working to understand this unprecedented situation. "The human devices create zones of fixed reality," he announced to his command staff. "Within these zones, the fundamental forces cannot be altered. But the devices themselves must operate within normal space to project these fields. Therefore, they can be destroyed by conventional means if we can reach them before entering their effective range." It was a sound analysis, but Vexthalen had made a crucial error. He assumed that the reality anchors were humanity's only trick, that their advantage began and ended with neutralizing Zephyrian abilities. He had no conception of what 10,000 years of warfare against their own species had taught humanity about adaptability and innovation. The Zephyrians reformed their fleet and began a new approach, using their superior speed to strike at anchor generators from long range. Several human ships lost their protective fields and found themselves once again facing the full might of Zephyrian power. Reality twisted around them as space itself became a weapon, crushing hulls that had been strong enough to resist conventional weapons. But as the first human vessels died, Admiral Chun revealed the depth of her species' preparation. Phase 2 is now in effect. All ships, activate Ghost Protocol. Across the human fleet, ships that had seemed destroyed by Zephyrian reality manipulation suddenly reappeared their hulls scarred but intact. The admiral had anticipated that some vessels would lose their anchor protection and had equipped every ship with experimental technology that could briefly resist reality alteration through quantum field manipulation. The dead ships had used the Zephyrians' overconfidence against them, playing possum while positioning themselves for devastating counterstrikes. Vexthalon watched in growing horror as the supposedly victorious ships found themselves surrounded by human vessels that had risen from the dead. The humans had deliberately sacrificed their protective fields to lure Zephyrian ships into vulnerable positions. It was a level of tactical thinking that the aliens, accustomed to winning through overwhelming force, had never encountered. "They're using our own power against us," Arbiter Zyxandra observed with something approaching admiration. "They allowed us to believe we had destroyed them, then used our assumptions to create an ambush. These creatures think like warriors, not victims." The battle raged for hours, neither side able to claim decisive victory. The Zephyrians had superior individual ships and reality-bending abilities, but the humans fought with a creativity and adaptability that continually surprised their enemies. Every time the aliens thought they had found a winning strategy, humanity revealed another innovation that turned the tables. As the conflict continued, something unprecedented began happening aboard the Zephyrian vessels. For the first time in their species' history, they were experiencing genuine fear. The knowledge that they could be hurt, that their divine power had limits, shattered the psychological foundation of their entire civilization. Some arbiters began questioning whether they were truly gods at all, while others demanded increasingly desperate measures to restore their sense of superiority. "We must use the reality storm," Arbiter Thexmaron declared, his form crackling with unstable energy. "Release our full power without restraint. Tear apart the very fabric of space around their world. Show them that gods cannot be defeated by mortals, regardless of their tricks." Vexthalon hesitated. The reality storm was a weapon of absolute destruction, capable of unmaking entire star systems by causing localized breakdowns in the fundamental forces that held matter together. It was a power reserved for the most extreme circumstances, as its use would leave nothing behind to rule over. "If we destroy their world, we gain nothing," he argued. "The purpose was to bring them into our empire, not to commit genocide. The purpose was to maintain our divine authority," Thexmaron countered. "If word spreads that mortals can stand against us, our entire empire will crumble. Better to rule over ashes than to not rule at all." As the Zephyrian leadership debated the use of their ultimate weapon, humanity prepared for the final phase of their desperate gambit. Admiral Chun had known from the beginning that conventional tactics, even enhanced by reality anchors, would not be enough to defeat an enemy with such overwhelming power. The battle in space had been a distraction, a way to keep the Zephyrians focused on the wrong threat, while Earth's real weapon prepared to fire. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in facilities built in the months since first contact, the most ambitious project in human history neared completion. If the Zephyrians thought themselves gods because they could manipulate reality, humanity would show them what mortals could accomplish when they refused to accept limitations. "Admiral," reported Dr. Tanaka from the Underground Command Center, "the Prometheus array is fully charged. We're ready to initiate the reality cascade." Chun smiled grimly as she gave the order that would change the galaxy forever. Fire. Far below Earth's surface, a device the size of a small city activated for the first and last time. The Prometheus array was humanity's answer to godlike power, a machine that could temporarily rewrite the laws of physics, not just in a small area, but across an entire solar system. It was a one-shot weapon that would burn itself out in the process, but its effect would be absolute. Reality rippled outward from Earth like waves on a pond, carrying with it a new set of physical laws that humanity had carefully designed. Throughout the solar system, Zephyrian abilities simply stopped working, not suppressed or dampened, but completely absent, as if they had never existed at all. For a brief moment that seemed to last forever, The aliens who had called themselves gods were reduced to ordinary beings floating helplessly in ships they could no longer control. In that moment of absolute vulnerability, humanity struck with everything they had. Ships that had been hiding in asteroid belts and behind planetary bodies emerged with weapons blazing. Earth's defense platforms, previously held in reserve, opened fire with weapons that could now penetrate previously impregnable Zephyrian shields. The aliens who had ruled the galaxy for 10 millennia found themselves experiencing something they had never imagined possible. They found themselves at the mercy of mortals. And humanity, remembering every species the Zephyrians had enslaved, every world they had conquered in the name of divine right, showed them exactly the same mercy they had shown others. None at all. The silence that followed the destruction of the Zephyrian fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had experienced in 10,000 years. For the first time since their rise to power, the self-proclaimed gods had not merely been challenged but utterly defeated. Their broken ships drifted through Earth's solar system like the shattered remnants of a divine myth, while the few surviving vessels fled in directions that would carry news of their defeat to every corner of their empire. High Arbiter Vexthalen found himself aboard a damaged ship, his once radiant form flickering weakly as he struggled to comprehend what had happened. The reality cascade had not only neutralized their powers, but had somehow fundamentally altered his people's connection to the forces they had wielded for millennia. Even now, hours after the effect had ended, his abilities remained severely diminished. "Ow!" he whispered to the empty command chamber, his voice no longer carrying the harmonics of divine authority. How did they know what we were? The answer, had he been able to accept it, was simple. Humanity had done something the Zephyrians had never expected. They had studied their enemies not as worshipful subjects seeking to understand divine mystery, but as scientists analyzing a phenomenon. Dr. Tanaka and her team had recognized that Zephyrian abilities, however advanced, still followed rules. And anything that followed rules could be understood, predicted, and ultimately countered. The Prometheus Array had been humanity's masterwork, a device that exploited the very source of Zephyrian power. By analyzing the quantum signatures of their reality manipulation, human scientists had discovered that the aliens' abilities depended on a specific resonance frequency that existed in the quantum foam underlying normal space. Disrupting that frequency didn't just neutralize their powers, it severed their connection to them entirely. In essence, humanity had not just defeated gods, they had unmade them. Aboard the Defiance, Admiral Chun stood in the observation deck, looking out at the wreckage of what had once been considered the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. Around her, the crew worked with quiet efficiency to coordinate rescue operations for human survivors while documenting the alien technology for future study. The Admiral felt no satisfaction in victory, only a grim determination to see their mission through to its conclusion. "Ma'am," reported Captain Liu, approaching with a communication tablet. "We're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Word of the defeat is spreading faster than we anticipated. Several client species of the Zephyrian Empire are declaring independence. Others are requesting human protection from Zephyrian retaliation." Chen nodded thoughtfully. They had always known that defeating the Zephyrian fleet would be only the beginning. An empire spanning thousands of worlds and countless species would not simply collapse overnight, even with its ruling class humbled. There would be chaos, power struggles, and possibly civil wars as the established order crumbled. "What about the surviving Zephyrians?" she asked. "3 ships escaped the solar system," Liu reported. "Our long-range sensors show they're heading toward different regions of the Empire, probably carrying word of what happened here. We also have several hundred Zephyrian survivors in our rescue ships." The fate of the Zephyrian prisoners was a question that had occupied human leadership since the battle's end. Throughout their empire, the aliens have been worshipped as literal gods, their word carrying the force of divine commandment. Now those same beings sat in human detention facilities, stripped of their power and faced with the reality of their own mortality. Dr. Tanaka had spent hours interviewing the captured Zephyrians, trying to understand how a species that had ruled so absolutely could adapt to defeat. What she found was deeply troubling. Many of the aliens seemed unable to process their new circumstances, their minds breaking under the weight of concepts their psychology couldn't accept. Others had descended into a kind of religious mania, insisting that their defeat was part of some greater divine plan beyond mortal understanding. But a few, like Vexthalen himself, showed signs of genuine comprehension. These individuals were slowly coming to terms with the possibility that their entire worldview had been based on false assumptions. For beings who had considered themselves gods, such realization was tantamount to psychological death and rebirth. It was one of these awakening Zephyrians who requested an audience with Admiral Chun 3 days after the battle. Vexthalen, his form now dim and solid rather than the shifting energy being he had once been, sat across from the human admiral in a simple conference room aboard the Defiance. The contrast between his current appearance and the godlike figure who had first demanded humanity's submission was striking. "I have come to understand something," Vexthalen said, his voice now merely that of another sentient being rather than a divine pronouncement. "We were never gods at all, were we?" Chun studied the alien carefully. Despite everything his species had done, she felt a measure of sympathy for a being whose entire existence had been built on a lie. "Power doesn't make someone divine," she replied. "The ability to reshape reality doesn't grant the right to rule over others. Those are lessons your species never learned." "But how did you resist us?" Vexthalen asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Every other species we encountered recognized our superiority immediately. They felt an instinctive need to submit to our will. Why were humans different?" Admiral Chun leaned back in her chair, considering how to explain something that was fundamental to human nature. "Because we've spent our entire history fighting tyrants who claimed divine authority. Kings who said they ruled by the will of gods. Emperors who declared themselves divine. Dictators who insisted they knew better than common people how society should be ordered. We learned long ago that anyone who demands worship or submission without earning it is probably neither divine nor superior. Your species fought its own gods." Vexthalen seemed genuinely puzzled by the concept. "We fought those who claimed to be gods," Chun corrected. "True divinity, if it exists, doesn't need to prove itself through force. It doesn't demand submission or worship. It certainly doesn't conquer and enslave in the name of bringing order. What your species did across the galaxy wasn't divine rule. It was just conquest with a religious justification." The former High Arbiter sat in silence for several minutes, processing concepts that challenged everything he had believed about himself and his people. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of something that might have been humility. "What will become of us now? My people who survive, I mean. We have ruled for so long that we have forgotten how to be anything else. Our entire culture is built around the belief in our own divinity. Without that belief, what are we?" It was a question that human leadership had been debating since their victory. The easy answer would be to simply eliminate the Zephyrians as a threat, but humanity had not fought against divine tyranny only to become tyrants themselves. Instead, they had developed a different approach. "You'll learn to be what you should have been all along," Chun replied. "Just another species among many, with your own strengths and weaknesses. Your reality manipulation abilities, once you reconnect to them, could be valuable tools for construction rather than conquest. Your long lifespans could make you excellent keepers of galactic history. But you'll do these things as partners with other species, not as their masters. And if we refuse? If some of my people cannot accept such a reduced existence?" Chen's expression hardened slightly. "Then they'll discover that humanity can be just as effective at preventing tyranny as we are at overthrowing it. We didn't fight you to become the new rulers of the galaxy. We fought you to ensure that no one could claim such absolute authority ever again." Over the following weeks, as news of the Zephyrian defeat spread throughout their former empire, the galaxy began to reshape itself in ways that no one could have predicted. Species that had been enslaved for millennia declared their independence and began forming new alliances. Worlds that had been terraformed to serve Zephyrian preferences began reverting to environments suited to their original inhabitants. Ancient cultures that had been suppressed under divine rule began to resurface. Humanity found itself in the unexpected position of being considered liberators by countless species they had never encountered. Delegations arrived from across the galaxy, seeking alliance with the species that had accomplished the impossible. Some came offering tribute, which humanity politely refused. Others came seeking protection, which humanity carefully considered based on each species' commitment to freedom and self-determination. The human response to their sudden prominence surprised many of their new allies. Rather than seizing control of the power vacuum left by the Zephyrians, humanity began organizing what they called the Galactic Council of Free Worlds. It was a voluntary association of independent species committed to mutual cooperation rather than imperial domination. Membership required only a commitment to non-aggression and respect for other species' right to self-governance. Dr. Tanaka, now appointed as humanity's chief xenological advisor, spent her time helping former Zephyrian client species adapt to freedom. Many had been enslaved for so long that they had forgotten how to govern themselves or make independent decisions. The transition was often difficult, sometimes violent, but it was their transition to make. The Zephyrians themselves faced the most difficult adjustment of all. Those who survived the battle found themselves scattered across the galaxy. Their empire collapsed, and their godhood revealed as illusion. Some descended into madness, unable to accept their reduced circumstances. Others became hermits, withdrawing from galactic society entirely. But a few, led by beings like Vexthalen, began the painful process of building a new identity based on cooperation rather than domination. 6 months after the battle that changed the galaxy, Admiral Chen stood once again in the observation deck of the Defiance, but this time she looked out at a very different scene. Instead of wreckage and destruction, she saw the construction of Harmony Station, the first major collaborative project between humanity and their new allies. Former Zephyrian reality manipulators worked alongside human engineers, Drachman warriors, and quantum collective drones to build something unprecedented, a space station designed by committee, built by consensus, and owned by no one species. It was messy, inefficient, and often chaotic. It was also beautiful in a way that the ordered perfection of Zephyrian architecture had never been. It was proof that different species could work together as equals, creating something greater than any could achieve alone. "Any regrets?" asked Captain Liu, joining her at the observation port. Chen considered the question seriously. The battle had cost thousands of human lives and had unleashed changes across the galaxy that were still unfolding. There would be challenges ahead, conflicts to resolve, and the constant work of building a truly free galactic society. But when she thought of the countless species now free to determine their own destinies, the choice seemed clear. "No," she said finally. "No regrets." They called themselves gods and demanded that we kneel. We showed them that the only divine right in this galaxy is the right of every sentient being to stand up and choose their own path. That was worth fighting for. As if to emphasize her words, a new ship approached Harmony Station, its design unlike anything in the database. It represented yet another species making contact with the galactic community, no longer as supplicants seeking divine approval, but as equals seeking friendship and cooperation. The age of gods was over. The age of freedom had begun. And across the galaxy, beings who had knelt in fear for 10,000 years finally stood tall and walked forward into an uncertain but hopeful future.